Dr. Malcolm Davis. He's a senior analyst in defense strategy and national security at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute and joins me live now from Honolulu. Thank you so much for being with us on the program. Joel kind of explained the value of these minerals that will be used by the United States, possibly by Russia. How relevant is this deal, though, in terms of Ukraine's current position and the leverage that it might give to Ukraine in the upcoming negotiations?
Well, look, I think any deal that can essentially buy Ukraine time to build up its military capabilities to deter another Russian attack in a year or so down the track is probably worth trying. But certainly, I would not see this deal as really anything more than a pause in the conflict. Putin has made it very clear that he wants Ukraine as a nation state to be finished, to be destroyed. He wants Zelenskyy out of power. He certainly does not want Ukraine in NATO, and he wants control of Ukrainian territory. The concerning thing is that the Trump administration appears to have given him a lot of those concessions up front without really extracting any concessions from the Russians in return. I mean, Trump in that discussion said, oh, yes, well, the Russians will have to make concessions, but that, as far as it went, was awfully vague. So I think that the real concern is that this will just be a transitory pause before the war begins again.
What do you make of Trump saying that Russia would need to make concessions, and how do you think Putin's going to react to that?
Look, I think clearly if the rare earths are in Russian-controlled territory, then Trump will be expecting the Russians to give the Americans access to those rare earths. That in itself is alarming in the sense that what it suggests is that Trump with Putin would work together where the Americans get the rare earths from the Russian-controlled territory whilst doing nothing to force the Russians out of that territory. So the Ukrainians in that Russian-controlled territory are still at the mercy of Russian forces. That would be, I think, a very bad outcome, not only for Ukraine, but also for Western security, because anything that happens now in Ukraine potentially leads to a much more insecure situation for Western Europe, particularly if, as part of a deal, Trump agrees to walk away from NATO, agrees to walk away from Article 5. And so you have the ending of US security guarantees to Europe, and Western Europe is far more vulnerable then to Russian military attack in the future.
Yeah, I mean, that brings me to my next question. Where does the EU stand in all of this? They also want security guarantees. What role are they going to take on moving forward to ensure those guarantees?
I think what Europe now has to do is realize that they can no longer rely on the Americans to be the security guarantor of Europe. They can no longer rely on the Americans to honor its obligations under Article 5 of the NATO Charter. And so here is both a period of intense risk, but also opportunity for Europe in the sense that intense risk in the sense that if Europe doesn't step up to build up its capabilities and prepare for the worst, then they will be vulnerable to Russian attack in a year or so. Opportunity in the sense that Europe does have now the incentive and the time to move towards building a new European security structure that maybe doesn't replace NATO. You want to keep that going, if at all possible, for the period after Trump is gone, but build up a new independent European security structure that can essentially step up and burden share in Europe and make sure that Europe is secure against Russian threats.
Senior analyst Dr. Malcolm Davis, thank you so much for joining us here on the NewsHour and sharing that insight with us.